under Wicker Street, but no one believed me. They told me what lies under a town is always ordinary: pipes, roots, bad foundations. That first night back on Wicker Street, I disagreed. The air felt like an apology passed between houses, the cobbles arranged with particular care, as if someone had laid them to remember. I walked slowly, palm testing the stones, until a fissure answered with a hollow thud. It was nothing, my neighbor said when I mentioned it over tea, nothing anyone could find. But the hollow had a cadence like a name. Names collected in the throat of the town clung to my tongue. I started with lists: the baker's wife, a boy who never learned to whistle, a woman who repaired umbrellas. They existed in my memory like bookmarks. When I asked the town clerk for records, his ledger had sun-faded entries, and then a smear, an empty margin where those names should have been. He smiled too politely, an erasure practiced for years. The ledger closed in my hands with the casual finality of a lid on a box. The street changed its mind in small ways. Lamps that had always been numbered contradicted themselves at night. House numbers shifted between polite conversations. My neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, swore she'd seen a child cross the lane at dusk and vanish into a shadow that hummed like rinsed cloth. We laughed until she shut the curtains so tightly the room went cold. Laughter here was a valve. Once it was turned, it allowed nothing unusual to pass. I started writing what I saw into a notebook, as if ink could anchor things that the town preferred to let go. At night, the fissure in the cobbles exhaled names. I could not tell anyone, words smoothed under polite denial. I began to map the exhalations where they were louder, where they were swallowed by a drain. The map looked like a child's drawing of weather: arrows, puffs, tiny crosses. One dawn, I found a hair tangled in a crack, not mine, not the color of any neighbor's, as if the street had coughed up evidence by mistake. When I held the hair to the light, it hummed, a low, remembered sound. I stopped expecting explanation and started listening for pattern. The brass key found me on a morning when memory felt thin and the world would not hold my attention. It lay half buried beside the mailbox, dull with age, warm from some internal patience. Its shape was plain, unremarkable save for the tiny dent on its bow that matched a dent in my childhood dresser. When I slid it into my palm, the town stilled, as if listening to what I might decide. Keys are promises. This one made a promise I hadn't known I wanted to keep. I used the key on a trapdoor that had been sealed under a stoop for decades. The seal gave like an old throat. It was not a dramatic entrance, no collapsing floor or hidden staircase, only a ladder descending into a cool, earth-smelling dark. Air from below smelled like dust boxes and wet paper, like a schoolroom after a storm. When my foot found the first rung, the town above resumed its polite hum, oblivious. Below, something shuffled in the dark, as if rearranging itself to make room. The room at the bottom was low and lined with shelves that held objects the town had misplaced. A tin of marbles with one missing, a school photo with a face blurred, a stack of letters that smelled like rain. Each shelf was labeled in neat, careful handwriting: forgotten, mistakes previously stored, temporary. The labels made the room bureaucratized sorrow. I ran my fingers over the spines until the letters returned names I had said aloud in the street came up from boxes, stubborn and precise, refusing to dissolve into polite absence. Sometimes the objects spoke without lips. A child's marble rolled away and bumped against a crate, the noise a punctuation that felt like a name spoken softly. The letters rustled like a congregation. One photograph, when tilted in the light, revealed a face I had never recognized, neither friend nor enemy, simply someone arranged perfectly to be forgotten. The room kept tidy notes of small disappearances, and when I tried to carry an object upstairs, the air resisted, soft as wool, thick as memory. The street asked for attendance and would not accept theft. I began depositing things back into the street in small rituals. A name carved into the underside of a brick, a letter slipped into a seam, a marble set in a fissure. For a while, the town tolerated my offerings as a curious hobby. Then the fissure closed around a stone I had left, and the hum that used to answer my fingertips turned into a tight, expectant silence. That night, I dreamt the houses were breathing in each other's names. In the dream, if a name was not surrendered willingly, it thickened into a stone, and the pavement swallowed it quietly. Neighbors stopped inviting me in. Invitations retreated like nesting things, insincere smiles, accidental phone calls that ended, friendly waves that dissolved into turned backs. The town perfected a polite architecture of absence. Once, Mrs. Holloway closed her door and pinned a postcard to it, "Forgetfulness Week," in tidy block letters. I stood on her porch and read the postcard until the words blurred. When I left, a man wheeled a cart of black soil down the lane and tamped it over a stretch of cobbles, as if the street could be resealed with tidy dark. Words became slippery. My name appeared on the ledger with a small erasure beside it, like a fingernail dragged across wet ink. I woke to find sentences in my notebook altered, a neighbor's surname crossed out and replaced by blank lines. My handwriting was the same, but the letters didn't feel like mine. In the street, a boy I had taught to whistle years ago stopped in front of me and listened intently, as if to confirm his own voice. He shrugged and walked away, whistling a tune that sounded only half remembered. One evening, compelled by something that felt less like curiosity and more like duty, I pried up the patched cobble where the soil had been tamped. My fingers hit a slab of differently textured stone, and beneath it was a shallow cavity full of names clipped from paper, names sewn into scraps of cloth, a child's ribbon, a torn receipt with a grocery list. Each item was an ordinary life reduced into tokens and stored. Someone or something had been making room. The thing's handiwork was domestic, and therefore all the worse. I tried to tell the police. I tried to tell my sister over a bad connection. Each attempt collided with procedural patience, and then, with an odd legal gentleness, forms to fill, suggestions that things get misremembered in time. Records show no anomalies, an officer said, tapping a screen that refused to display my notebook's names. When I insisted, the officer's smile became too fixed, and his eyes slid sideways, as if refusing to look at a person who might demand inconvenient attention. The town had perfected a bureaucracy that swallowed questions, refusal changed into intervention. A stranger, the kind who brings kindly pamphlets and an unobtrusive badge, visited my door. He spoke of community memory initiatives, of letting go gracefully. He offered a small, polite box with a lid and a suggestion. Place what troubles you inside and trust the town to keep it safe. He used the word closure as though it were a warm product. I took the box to the doorway of the subterranean room and placed it on a shelf labeled temporary, and watched until the lid seemed to settle deeper than its hinge allowed. After that, the town's denials became softer, but more complete. Voices I had heard in nighttime fissures began to require answers I could not supply. When I walked the street, the cobbles rearranged themselves subtly beneath my feet, so that I lost the memory of where I'd been 10 paces before. People nodded when I mentioned the basement, and then looked past me, eyes flicking to a patch of pavement, as though confirming something still sealed. I learned the shape of a community that keeps itself tidy by hiding the edges of its own sorrow. On the last night, I saw the street rearrange with intention. Houses leaned inward like listeners forming a circle. The swing began to move gently without wind. The mailbox lid opened a fraction and closed. From the fissure rose a chorus of muffled syllables that matched the cadence of my own breathing. I stepped toward it and felt the stone under my feet answer like a palm. The town, which had always preferred tidy narratives, suddenly wanted something of me: a donation, an apology, a name. I realized I had become the only stubborn thing, insisting the street remember. What happened next is hard to describe, because diction prefers tidy endpoints. I stepped over the fissure and knelt. The stone was not cold, it was the temperature of old paper. It opened to accept what I offered: a list of names, a scrap of my handwriting, a memory I had failed to protect. The street closed like hands over a box. Neighbors said later they'd seen me leave before dawn, and then not at all. There was no scandal, no screaming, only a small archival hush that settled into place like new mortar. In the weeks that followed, people resumed their errands and tea times and polite inconveniences. The ledger's blanks filled with neat, anonymous entries. The swing hung where it always had, motionless, carrying a faint taste of salt air. I am not sure whether I was consumed by compassion or by an elaborate compassion offered by the town to itself. The last page of my notebook is empty now. Sometimes, when the light is exactly right, I think I hear a whisper that sounds like my name, folded into the street and returned, softer and stranger than before.